book review. So I'm going to be starting a new series on this channel where I review books after I've read them. I don't know how often I'm going to be posting in this series. It all depends on how quickly I read books, which probably isn't going to be that often. But, oh well. In the meantime, the first book that I will be reviewing on this channel is The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Now, The Selfish Gene is mainly about evolution. And I think that we all have at least a basic understanding of how evolution works. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, yada yada. But I'm not sure that many people truly understand it, at least not that well. And this book really helps with that. So the main argument of The Selfish Gene is that evolution is determined by, genes. And the idea being that genes decide who we are. So, as Richard Dawkins puts it, genes have developed survival machines. That is, organisms like us. And these survival machines, their purpose is to spread their genes as much as possible. And so basically, the idea goes that the gene, which creates the survival machine that spreads the most of its genes, will become the most common gene. And in a world with limited resources, that is the gene that will survive. Now, the interesting thing here is that we're talking about genes and not about individuals, as evolution has normally been taught. You might think that this is a pretty small difference, and in a sense it is, but it provides a lot of important details that provide context for a lot of things that weren't already explained. And a lot of these details went over or talked about in this book. So, this book talks about how genetics impacts evolution in terms of aggression and competition and family. And it provides explanation for some things that weren't normally understood in non-genetic evolution. So, for example, there are certain situations in which a person takes individual sacrifices for the benefit of others. So why would that be? In normal evolution, shouldn't that not happen? Well, if we're thinking about genetics, then if you think about it, you share about half of your genetics with your siblings, and also half of your genetics with your children. So that means that if you help your parents raise 3 siblings, versus the opportunity to raise 2 children yourself, it would actually help your genes more to help raise siblings. And another very interesting example is that if, say, you, like all organisms, take up resources, that's at somewhat of a sacrifice to, the organisms around you who also want resources. So, if you say committing suicide helps your siblings twice as much as it helps yourself, then it would actually help your genes most by you committing suicide. So this is very interesting, since you would not expect under evolution that a person would voluntarily, commit suicide or stop having children. But looked at it from the perspective of genes, that actually makes perfect sense, and it explains a lot of, again, really weird behavior, like animals committing suicide. Why would that happen? Well, there's your answer. So, the reason that Dawkins thinks that genes are so important is that genes are replicators. Now, what a replicator is just anything that makes copies of itself. And the thing about replicators in a limited resource environment is that only a certain number can survive. So, the replicators that are the best at replicating are the ones that will survive. And so, the most common example of this in our world is genes. But Dawkins says that it doesn't need to be genes. There can be other replicators. And so, one very important point that he gets to toward the end of the book is a sort of other type of replicator that has started occurring. So I will start quoting from the book. Quote, "I think that a new kind of replicator has recently emerged on this very planet. It is staring us in the face. It is still in its infancy, still drifting clumsily about in its primeval soup, but already it is achieving evolutionary change at a rate that leaves the old gene panting far behind. The new soup is the soup of human culture. We need a name for the new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission, or a unit of imitation. Mimeme comes from a suitable Greek root, but I want a monosyllable that sounds a bit like gene. I hope my classicist friends will forgive me if I abbreviate mimeme to meme." That quote, written in 1976, is the origin of the word meme. And so, in the book, Richard Dawkins talks about what memes are from an evolutionary standpoint. In fact, I originally started reading the book just to learn about memes, but I got a lot more out of it than just that. This book has been incredibly influential, both professionally and popularly. It has very important ideas that have transformed the field of evolutionary biology. But it's also written in simple enough language that anybody can really read it and learn from it. And of course, you can see the influence of this book whenever you see the word meme. You have this book to thank for that. So, in conclusion, if you want to learn more about how evolution works from a genetic perspective, if you want to learn more about memes, if you want to learn more about the origin of memes, then I highly recommend that you read The Selfish Gene. So, yeah, that was my review. Thank you for watching.